Okay, today on the deep dive, we're digging into a really significant international trade agreement, the one between the United States and Europe.
That's right. And we're looking at this through the lens of pretty compelling analysis from Visual Economic EN over on YouTube.
Yeah, and they present this striking narrative. It's basically one side achieving what they describe as, well, an overwhelming victory, almost a steamrolling.
It's a fascinating perspective, definitely. The analysis characterizes the agreement not so much as a reciprocal deal, give and take,
Mm-hmm.
but almost as an imposition by one side, which kind of flies in the face of the official statement suggesting otherwise.
Right.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to
Hmm.
try and understand precisely what happened. What did each side actually gain? What did they lose?
And crucially, how this might ripple out, through markets and economies globally.
Exactly.
And here's where it gets really interesting, or maybe provocative. The analysis, yeah, it uses terms like he crushed, humiliated, and bulldozed Brussels without mercy. That's pretty direct language.
It certainly is.
And it even points to Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president. The source says she called Trump a great leader, even tough, constructive, even fair.
Despite the deal itself looking pretty lopsided, according to this analysis.
Exactly, despite the commitments she signed off on. And, that visual they mentioned.
Oh, the golf game.
Yeah, her having to wait for him to finish a golf game in Scotland just to meet him. That really does set a particular tone, doesn't it?
It's not exactly standard diplomatic protocol, is it? Paints a picture.
So, connecting this back to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the analysis just flat out refutes the idea this was balanced, calls it a lie.
Okay.
It asserts this outcome was exactly what Trump was aiming for and that he got, quote, pretty much everything he set out to get.
Including a big political win, presumably.
Huge political win, yeah. The source notes the celebrations from his team were euphoric.
Okay, so with such a, well, forceful opening from the source, what specifics did the U.S. actually secure in this deal? What are the concrete gains?
Right. First off, the U.S. is set to impose a universal tariff, 15%, on nearly all imports from Europe.
15?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a massive jump from the pre-Trump average, isn't it? What was it, like 1 point something percent?
Yeah, 1.6% was the average before, so a huge leap. And key sectors like cars, pharmaceuticals, big European exports, they get hit hard.
Okay. What about things like steel and aluminum? Those tariffs were already high.
They stay high, 50%, though there are some quotas at lower rates. But here's a crucial bit. The U.S. gets to set zero tariffs on strategic products, things it decides are, quote, essential to keep its economic engine running.
Like what sort of things?
Aircraft parts, engines, certain chemicals, specific semiconductor equipment, raw materials, that kind of thing.
Interesting. So selective free trade for the U.S. on what it needs, while Europe faces broad tariffs.
Pretty much. Which
Yeah.
brings up a critical point you raised earlier. What's the significance of the EU basically legitimizing these U.S. tariffs, these Section 232 tariffs, the national security ones?
Right. That's a really important question. The analysis calls this a serious mistake by Brussels, one they could end up paying dearly for.
Even though von der Leyen apparently got a commitment, they wouldn't raise those specific tariffs further on European companies.
Exactly. The source seems unimpressed by that commitment, suggesting the initial acceptance was the real damage.
Okay, so that's the U.S. side, according to this analysis. What about Europe? What did they concede? Because it sounds pretty dramatic.
It does. The analysis says the EU agreed to drop its tariffs to 0% on U.S. products.
Zero. So just abandoning reciprocity altogether.
Essentially, yes. Abandoning the idea of matching tariffs. And they're opening up their huge market, what, 20 trillion? And for the first time ever, completely accepting U.S. standards for cars and industrial goods.
Wow, okay. That's significant.
It is. And beyond tariffs, there's more. The EU member states committed to spending a lot more on U.S.-made weapons.
Okay, defense spending.
And maybe the biggest one, they pledged to really ramp up buying U.S. energy, oil, LNG, other types.
To replace Russian imports.
Effectively, yes. Replacing almost all remaining imports from Russia, according to the source. It quotes von der Leyen mentioning a total bill around $750 billion over the next 3 years.
$750 billion. How does that compare to now?
Well, the source notes that in 2024, EU energy imports from the U.S. were under $100 billion, out of a total energy import bill of about $375 billion worldwide.
So this implies
Right.
the EU becoming massively dependent on the U.S. for energy.
Hugely dependent is the phrase used. And there were other promises, too, like not to poke the American tech giants in the eye.
The regulatory side.
Exactly. And plans to promote $600 billion in investment inside the U.S., which the source kind of dismisses as fluff.
So this analysis really doesn't hold back, does it? It describes this whole thing not as a deal for Europe, but a bloodletting.
Pretty visceral language, yeah.
Europe agrees to higher tariffs on its own stuff, opens its doors wide to American goods, without getting anything in return, the source claims.
And locking in higher costs, right, with the energy purchases.
Exactly. Committing to structurally higher production costs by buying American energy. The critique goes on, suggesting Europe is basically...
Admitting fault.
Yeah. Admitting they've been taking advantage of Uncle Sam, backing Trump's narrative, agreeing to foot more of Ukraine's bill.
Wow.
And pledging to send even more money to the U.S., which, the source adds, will just be paid for with more debt and higher taxes in Europe.
So the whole package from this viewpoint is just completely one-sided, no matter how von der Leyen might try to spin it.
Right. Like that quote they mentioned, the agreement reached today brings certainty in uncertain times. The analysis isn't buying it.
No. And it highlights that moment, described as humiliating, when von der Leyen was asked what the U.S. actually gave up.
And her answer?
Focused on rebalancing trade, the deficit on the U.S. side, which the source calls pathetic.
Why pathetic?
Because the analysis argues that if you factor in the services balance and profits from American companies in Europe, the total flow.
Not just goods.
Right. Then the U.S. actually ran a current account surplus with the EU for a long stretch, 2007 to 2019, which completely changes that deficit narrative.
Okay, that's a fundamental challenge to the premise.
It is. And von der Leyen's photo op afterwards, the heartfelt thank you to Trump. The source uses that as more proof that Brussels either has no clue what's going on or simply doesn't want to know.
Okay, so if Europe lost out so badly, according to the source, who are the clear winners? It must name some.
Oh, absolutely. 3 clear winners identified. First, and seemingly without a doubt in the source's view, Donald Trump.
A massive political win, they called it.
Massive, because the EU was seen as maybe the only bloc big enough with enough leverage to really push back against the U.S. on trade.
And their capitulation means?
It means, according to this analysis, that the rest of the world will have little choice but to follow suit. They even mentioned Japan already caving, along with others.
So a domino effect.
That's the implication. Which leads to the big question the analysis tackles. Why? Why did Europe fold like that?
Yeah, what's the explanation?
Well, the source suggests a few things. One, the EU just didn't have the courage to play hardball. They trusted Trump would be more reasonable than he turned out to be, maybe.
Okay, what else?
It also points to what it explicitly calls political blackmail tactics.
Like?
Threats, cutting aid to Ukraine, pulling U.S. troops out of Europe, even abandoning NATO. Serious stuff.
Wow. But didn't Europe have any leverage?
That's the interesting part. The source argues they had plenty of leverage. Energy, capital flows, tariffs, their relationship with China.
So why didn't they use it?
They just didn't know how to use them, is the rather blunt assessment. And it describes Trump's negotiating tactic as straight out of the madman theory.
The madman theory. Acting unpredictable to gain an edge.
Exactly. Apparently, his team had a deal ready, a 10% reciprocal tariff deal. But Trump suddenly just refused it.
And then?
Threw out this new demand, a 30% universal tariff, just completely out of left field, designed to throw Brussels off balance.
Which resulted in?
What the source calls a total victory for him, ending up with a deal we've discussed.
Okay, so Trump is winner number 1. Who's number 2?
American companies. And by extension, the S&P 500, the stock market index.
How so?
They get completely unrestricted access to that huge European market, over 450 million consumers, plus less competition at home because of the tariffs on European goods.
Right. And the source mentioned something about tax cuts.
Yeah. The hope being that U.S. tax cuts might offset the costs of tariffs for American companies, meaning Europe, in effect, helps finance those tax breaks.
Interesting angle.
Plus, the deal removed the immediate threat of a full-blown trade war, which apparently had markets seriously spooked.
So stability, market access, generally good for the U.S. dollar too, I suppose.
Yep. The analysis notes futures surged when the deal was announced. Markets liked it, at least initially.
Any specific sectors that are big winners?
Oh yeah, it highlights a specific jackpot for U.S. energy and defense companies.
Makes sense, given the commitments.
Right. Energy firms are seen as basically kicking Russia out of the gas and oil game in Europe.
And defense.
Defense contractors are cashing in on massive rearmament packages in Europe. Big orders.
Okay. Anyone else?
U.S. foundries, chip makers too. Apparently, there's language in the agreement favoring their equipment being used in the EU, citing security reasons.
Which just reinforces that dependence point, right? On U.S. tech as well as energy.
Massively increases it, yes. Dependence on both energy and technology.
Okay, so Trump, U.S. companies. Who is the third winner identified in this analysis?
Political parties in Europe. Specifically, those often described as more nationalists or perhaps more aligned with Trump's worldview.
Why them?
The prediction is they're likely to gain a wave of new support, perhaps feeding off any dissatisfaction with the deal or the EU leadership.
Okay. But surely it can't be all positive, even for the U.S. side. The analysis must point out some risks or downsides.
Oh, absolutely. It's not presented as a pure win with no consequences. That raises the key question. What are the biggest looming risks here, according to the source?
Let's start with the U.S. What are the potential negatives?
Well, the obvious one. Tariffs. They tend to weaken consumer purchasing power because imported goods get more expensive.
Right, inflation.
Exactly. Pushes prices higher. And it can make American companies that rely on imported components less competitive globally.
Okay. Anything else?
There's a more complex argument about the trade deficit. If it goes down, which is the goal,
Right.
then potentially the inflow of foreign capital that helps finance America's financial muscle might also shrink.
Meaning less funding for.
Could mean less funding for things like startups, potentially leading to slower economic growth down the line. Especially the source notes. Since Americans aren't exactly known for being big savers, they rely on that foreign capital.
Is there evidence for the price impact?
The analysis mentions a Harvard study showing that imported goods prices did rise faster than domestic ones after previous tariff hikes.
And the overall level of U.S. tariffs now, where does it stand?
The source describes it as the highest it's been since the 1930s, which is quite a statement. Roughly 6 times higher than when Trump took office.
Wow. And the cost of that, who bears it?
Well, estimates cited suggest 80 to 90% is absorbed by U.S. consumers and businesses, so it's described as essentially a hidden tax hike.
Any sense of the total global impact?
Bloomberg Economics estimated it could be around $2 trillion in global losses, with a big chunk falling on the U.S. economy itself.
So real economic pain, potentially.
Yeah, they point to headlines like GM profit shrinks after $1.1 billion tariff hit as examples.
Okay, so significant potential downsides for the U.S. What about Europe? Obviously, the analysis paints a bleak picture, but what are the specific ongoing risks?
Well, interestingly, the source says it's not a full-blown tragedy in purely economic terms, at least not immediately. The estimates suggest maybe tens of billions off a, huge 20 trillion euro GDP. So a relatively limited direct economic impact overall. But many European companies will continue losing competitiveness, which could slow down the recovery of key economies, like Germany's.
So a drag on growth.
A drag, yes. But perhaps more critically, the analysis argues, is the hit to the EU's political strength and credibility.
Because they came out looking weak.
Exactly. They've come out of this looking really bad. In the source's quite blunt phrasing, undermines their standing.
Anything else for Europe?
It also points to the diverging climate policies, the U.S. scaling back regulations while the EU imposes high costs.
Like carbon pricing.
Yeah, it gives the example of Estonia's shale oil industry struggling with emissions credits. It just makes EU companies less competitive compared to U.S. counterparts who don't face those same costs.
Okay, that makes sense. Is there a bigger, maybe global concern highlighted?
Yes. And this might be the biggest worry of all, according to the source. That this whole episode is fueling a global surge in protectionism.
Oh, so?
The argument is, if other countries see the U.S., the world's largest economy, getting away with this, imposing unilateral tariffs, seemingly benefiting from it politically.
Others might think, why don't we do that too?
Precisely. It could lead to a sharp rise in protectionist policies around the world, which the source calls terrible news for the global economy.
A slippery slope towards trade wars.
Potentially. And it also notes that because this is framed so strongly as a political victory for Trump, it makes it much harder politically for the U.S. to walk any of it back later.
Even if a different administration wanted to.
Exactly. It sort of locks things in, pushing us closer to what the source fears could be a new protectionist era, and concludes, bad news, friends.
A sobering thought.
It is. So what's really striking here is that while this analysis clearly presents the deal as a huge win for Trump and certain U.S. interests, it also very carefully lays out some significant downsides. Real risks, both for the U.S. and Europe, but maybe especially for the global economy and the whole future of international trade rules.
Right. So wrapping this up then, what does this analysis mean for you, the listener? When you think about Europe's increased reliance on the U.S., not just for energy, but now potentially critical tech too.
And you consider that madman theory of negotiation seemingly being validated, at least according to this source.
What could the long-term geopolitical consequences actually be for the balance of power, for stability in international relations? Something to definitely mull over until our next deep dive.